Previously on Schengen 200.
This is the starting point of the longest point-to-point journey you can make by public transport on the surface, entirely within the Schengen zone. As of 2 days ago, every railway line linking southern Scandinavia and northern Scandinavia has been cut.
This is basically our only option if we want to try and get to where we need to be by the end of today.
Well, I can hardly not come to Schengen, given it's sort of on the way.
93 hours into our attempt to cross the Schengen zone in 200, and we're standing in Schengen, next to the Mid-Moselle tri-point where Luxembourg, France and Germany meet. On the 14th of June 1985, a boat, specifically that boat over there, now owned by the town council, the Prinzessin Marie Astrid, moored at the tri-point, and the representatives of 5 governments signed the agreement, at this point just covering Benelux, France and West Germany. Given the boat's positioning, we could just as easily be talking about the Perle or APAC area as much as the Schengen one, the neighbouring villages in Germany and France. Germany has currently temporarily reintroduced border controls, and in the early hours of this morning my passport was checked entering the nation at Flensburg, but there appear to be no checks here. Clearly the Bundesrepublik thinks that checking passports on the bridge at Schengen would be just a little on the nose. We've walked across the Moselle into our 5th country, Luxembourg. I need to end today in France, but while La République is barely metres away, the simplest way to get towards the capital from here is to cut westwards across the diminutive Grand Duchy. Luxembourg, famously, made all its internal public transport free in 2020. I'm in two minds about the concept of free public transport, and part of me would rather they took a small fare from me and used it to pay for some information provision at Schengen's main bus stop, but it does feel like an absolute bargain to be on this comfortable bus, speeding along a motorway and through tunnels under the vineyards for nothing. This is an express bus from Schengen and some German towns on the other side of the Moselle to Luxembourg city itself, but the capital is the wrong side of some rail engineering works for us, so I'm getting off at the only intermediate stops it makes after Schengen, in a town called Aspelt. I don't really have much to tell you about Aspelt, other than it's a handy interchange point from bus 402 to bus 550. It has very substantial bus shelters, and that Luxembourgers smoke a lot more at bus stops than I'm used to. Here's the 550, which is electric but late. Most buses in Luxembourg seem to run a bit late, which may be related to the country having more cars per head than anywhere else on the planet. As we head along the bright green southern borderlands of the Grand Duchy, I mean it's all borderlands really, isn't it? I'm enjoying learning Luxembourgish pronunciation from the automated stop announcements. It's sort of a lilting version of Dutch.
Allonge. Rue naar halt.
Very soon we're at Bettembourg station, where I also made a bus rail interchange last year when on the trail of Sherlock Holmes. Just as then, the line from the capital to here was closed for lengthy summer engineering works. That short bit of line must be practically plated with gold by now. Our France-bound train is starting here as a result of those engineering works, and within a few minutes my TER Grand Est double-deck unit is sailing over the border. This journey is very quiet, but at peak times the train would be packed with transfrontalier workers seeking the sweet spot of earning Luxembourg wages with French cost of living. Big car parks at the stations just over the border cater for park and riding border hoppers. Just like the Øresund yesterday, you've got a single international commuter zone made possible by Schengen. We followed the Moselle through 3 countries today, and this is our final crossing of it at Thionville. We've got a reasonable amount of time before we need to be in Paris this evening, so while I could make a straight shot for the City of Light, we'll opt for a slightly eccentric routing to get there. There's only so many straightforward journeys along the Ligne à grande vitesse Est Européenne that a man and his turtle can take. And it's not a proper rail journey through France without a connection between regional trains at a slightly overlarge junction station. This is Hagondinge, which, like many slightly lost their way French towns, brands itself as a ville fleurie. There's my diesel train west, waiting amid its own fleurie, though one of our first stops, Moyeuvre-Grande, is still more a fleurie than Hagondinge. I was in the process of remarking to myself about just how smart and comfortable these regional diesel trains are when we came to a halt for a suspiciously long time at a station called Omicourt. The driver, in traditional SNCF uniform of jeans and t-shirt, emerges from the cab with his fault-finding ring binder, looking worried. Much restarting of the engine, little reversing moves, and lights being turned on and off ensues, but eventually the ring binder of power does its job and we're off en route to another weird, middle-of-nowhere junction at Conflans-Jarny. Beyond here, we're rocking along what used to be quite a major main line to Paris, but is now a single-track, underserved, dead-end branch line across the Meuse. We climb into the strategic wooded heights east of the town of Verdun, a point of such advantage on the road to Paris that both French and German World War I commanders were prepared to spend vast quantities of blood and treasure in seeking to defend or gain them. At the summit, we enter the Tunnel de Tavannes. You catch a glimpse of a parallel tunnel entrance beside the one our train is using. In 1916, 500 French troops, using it as a bunker, died in that tunnel, killed when grenades stored at the western end accidentally exploded, causing great rushes of air and fire through the bore. Verdun was once a major through station, with buildings designed by Gustave Eiffel. It's now the end of the line, with the tracks westward rusting away, the rail connection to the capital gone, and the sole rush is of schoolchildren awaiting their afternoon train home. While Verdun is a very smart, gently touristed but lived-in feeling sous-prefecture on the River Meuse, it's also a town that is lived in by its history. The chapel of St Nicholas in the town centre still bears its scarring from the Great War. Monuments and tributes to those lost defending the strategic heights in the town citadel are everywhere. The sombre eyes of gigantic stone soldiers bore into the town. The gently flapping tricolours are called to remember the glory of and sacrifice for France. The concept of Verdun for many French people is not an out-of-the-way town of 16,000 people on the Meuse, but the name of a miraculous delivery. It's a large part of how Philippe Pétain, wearing the prestige of saviour of Verdun, was able to convince so many to follow him into the senility and shame of Vichy 2 decades later. With no trains having run west of Verdun since 2013, the key rail access route to the town is now via the wonderfully named Gare Meuse TGV Voie Sacrée, one of the beetroot field middle-of-nowhere stations serving whole départements that pepper the French high-speed lines. There is, at least, a bus from Verdun's vast gare routière to connect with each TGV. As the TGV station's name suggests, it sits on the Voie Sacrée, the name given to the sole supply route available to relieve Verdun after all other roads and railways had been cut by the Germans, and down which our bus now speeds. Run with, literally, military precision, by 1916 trucks were running along this road every 16 seconds. Making its only stop between Verdun and the TGV station, our bus pauses outside the town hall of the village of Souilly. This was Pétain's headquarters, facing right onto the Voie Sacrée during the Battle of Verdun. We pull up in front of the striking Gare de Meuse, sitting amid cow pastures and rolling hills. Opened in 2007 along with the rest of this high-speed line to the east, it's allegedly the first wooden station building to open in France since 1856. And from here, one of the handful of TGVs that loop off the fast through lines each day can speed us in just 1 hour to the heart of Paris. At over 300 kilometres per hour, by far the fastest speed on this journey so far, our TGV flings itself across the open prairies of Champagne and Marne, 10 carriages of snoozing travellers in its train. I've been anxiously monitoring French news throughout this journey to see if yesterday's informal strike action by the Bloc on Tous movement would spread into today. Wind slightly taken out of its sails by the resignation of the government, probably the last French government but free by the time you watch this, it became less Bloc on Tous and more Bloc on quelque chose, and France is circulating pretty normally today. Arriving at the Gare de l'Est, and my heart sinks when it's announced the TGV will be coupling to another already in the platform. Being in the rear coach of my train, that means I might have practically walked from Meuse by the time I get to the distant buffer stops. There's also a large part of me that hasn't yet forgiven them for painting the Paris metro trains blue. The old turquoise green was horrible, but it somehow screamed Paris. With an hour or so to spare, I am, however, very happy that one of my favourite Paris hangout spots, the Cave La Bourgogne in the 5th arrondissement, is reasonably handy for my onward terminus station, so I can wolf something down and then keep moving on. And it is a bit of a landmark moment.
Well, as of this moment, we are 100 hours in of the 200 hours. We're in Paris. We're halfway there time-wise. Both of those things are something to celebrate. Cheers.
It may be the wine, but I'm getting a little soppy, seeing an elderly man come to pick up his wife from the bar, in her 70s, several glasses of Burgundy in a battered Renault Clio, and I think it's the cutest thing ever. Mayor Hidalgo, that man, and that man alone, can continue to drive in central Paris. Feels like there should be a Morgan Freeman narrated documentary about the near endless march of suitcase-wheeling night train passengers around the equally never-ending works to refurbish Paris Austerlitz station, though at least there are signs that the fine original Austerlitz roof is beginning to re-emerge after many years of ignominy. After 2 failed attempts in Scandinavia, we're catching our first night train of the journey, and there it is, hauled into the station by one of the timeless nez cassé, broken nose, locomotives. We're in the front section for La Tour de Carol, high in the Pyrenees, just 3 coaches on the front of a very large number of carriages only going as far as Toulouse. Like I say, a lot of Toulouse coaches. Still going. At last, there we are. The French government has, over the last few years, started to regrow their domestic night train network, though only with more basic couchettes, not sleepers. But this train to remote La Tour, far from the high-speed networks, with lots of winter sports and summer hiking market, never quite died out. It's also, ever since the 2013 death of the Tren hotels, the closest there is to a night train to Spain, which is why we're on it. Now I just need to make my bed and lie in it. We're a full first-class compartment tonight, 4 of us, all silently agreeing we're glad we aren't in with the very boisterous scouts further up the corridor. Time to do what the travel influencers do. Let's explore the free goodie bag. Okay, well, that didn't take long. It's 8:20 on a grey morning, and there really aren't as many mountains as there should be out of the window. A glance at the app tells me we've picked up a 30-minute delay overnight due to disruptive passengers at Orléans. Well, they weren't in my compartment, so I had a very good night's sleep, undisturbed by any snoring, which by a process of elimination means I must have been the compartment snorer. Sorry guys. The 30-minute delay is worrying though, as our connection at the border, I'm putting connection in inverted commas because it's not officially acknowledged as such anywhere, is just 20 minutes. Will the French manage to regain some time? Will the Catalans wait? Time will tell. We finally quit the flatlands south of Toulouse and pause in the Pyrenean foothill town of Foix, under its dramatic castle which guards the entrance to the Ariège gorges. Foix resisted sieges from Simon de Montfort and the Albigensians, and its count went on to become King Henri IV of France. Clearly not a bad place to control. Rocky cliff faces begin to appear above the placid waters of the river as the ascent proper towards the mountains begins. Ax-les-Thermes station is a special place for me. For much of my early childhood, my family would holiday in a gîte in the mountains above here, arriving on this very train. My parents' bikes, sent registered luggage from Victoria a week before, would be waiting with the station master before we cycled up, with me on the front of the bike, a very steep hairpinning road, which I've subsequently seen featured as a difficult climb in several editions of the Tour de France. Beyond Ax, it starts to get really steep, our train clickety-clacking over jointed track that probably hasn't been renewed since I came this way aged 5. Higher and higher we climb into the mountains, once the final retreat of the Cathars, dropping off a few hikers at each little station. It's hard to capture on film the engineering genius of a spiral tunnel, but you can just about glimpse, far below in the valley, the railway we were running on a few minutes ago before we corkscrewed up through the mountainside. L'Hospitalet Pré Landor is so called because, well, it's as prey to that micronation as you can get by rail. One passenger from our delayed train rushes for the sporadic international bus connection to the Andorran capital, waiting in the forecourt. And then we clatter and roar our way through a long, narrow ascending tunnel which is murder on ears already fragile thanks to the altitude, to emerge on the Cerdanya plateau at Porte-Puymorén, which at 1,562 metres above sea level is the highest place you can reach in Europe on a standard gauge adhesion worked train. Having broken through into the hazy mountain sunshine, we squeal our way slowly through the stunning highland scenery towards the terminus and frontier station at La Tour de Carol, from where, I expect, the Barcelona train has already left. And yes, that's a very empty Iberian broad gauge platform over there. Not a huge surprise, as the intercity from Paris was almost 45 minutes late in the end, and the Spanish train from here has to thread into the Barcelona suburban network way down the line. But with a 3-hour interval service, it is still annoying, if not yet disastrous. La Tour is the only current cross-border rail route across the Pyrenees. The other France to Spain connections go around the mountain wall via the coast, and because of the differing gauges, standard gauge in France, broad gauge in Spain, trains can't run through. Thanks to insular bloody-mindedness, they can barely even connect. The Bistro de la Gare is doing a roaring trade with international travellers stranded here for the best part of 3 hours. I'm sure Madame la Patronne didn't quietly stuff a €10 note into the pocket of the Barcelona train driver and whisper, "Away you go," on the dot of 10:30. I'll join the feasting throng later, but first I'm going to hop on the €1 bus to La Tour de Carol proper, a little over a kilometre away. The station is actually called La Tour de Carol NV because it's really in NV. In La Tour I'm seeking out the local watercourse, unsurprisingly called the Carol, where I can give my feet a much needed bathe in its super clear racing mountain waters, and Mrs Turtle can consider doing likewise. The Cerdanya has a bit of a split personality, as demonstrated by the presence of the weird Spanish enclave of Livia just down the road, and the fact that the hilarious "picking up after your dog is just like doing yoga" signs are in French and Catalan. Walking back to the station, a roadside sign alerts me to the fact that in 1939 the meadow above was filled with refugees from Francoism who camped in the open air in their thousands at border locations like this before they were transferred to lowland camps. It's only really when arriving by foot that you are hit by the full scale of the station building, which serves a pair of villages whose joint population barely tops 1,000. Border stationing was a human-intensive business back in the day. Today, there's no border guards, and a handful of train staff and permanent wait teams fit happily into the Bistro de la Gare. And who can blame them when this lot cost just €13? Remarkably, La Tour has a third gauge of railway alongside the standard and Iberian, making it one of only a handful of stations to have 3 gauges, alongside Ondé in Euskadi, where I started my narrow-way adventure earlier this year. These are the narrow tracks of the metre gauge, third rail electrified and stupidly scenic Petit Train Jaune, which winds east through the mountains to Villefranche. The service is pretty sparse, but one of the line's Catalan Canary yellow trains, dating from 1909, rolls in while I'm having lunch, compressors pounding. Despite the very fun open carriages and jaunty livery, this is technically a normal regional train run by SNCF and charging standard bargain fares. And with the train from Barcelona now arriving on the right, you have the rare sight of trains on 3 different gauges next to each other. Despite a 3-hour journey ahead to Barcelona, our train south is a suburban unit, running as part of the Rodalies de Catalunya network, line 5 of this far-reaching Barcelonan spider's web of railways. Happily, the Rodalies suburban seating is a little more comfy than it looks. Within a minute or so of leaving La Tour, we've crossed the border into Catalonia and Spain in a featureless field, marked only by a sign noting the change in rail infrastructure owners. It's underwhelming for our final border crossing of the journey, even if appropriately understated for a Schengen adventure. We almost immediately come to Mountain Ring de Puigcerdà, a place so hilly it needs a funicular to link the town centre and the station, and which was the only place during the Spanish Civil War to elect an anarchist-led town council. In many ways, the Catalan line from La Tour is a mirror image of the French line, climbing steeply out the Cerdanya up the valley of the Alp, then equally steeply down the other side towards the plains, with its own spiral tunnel, twin to that on the French side, enabling lots of height to be lost very quickly. Or really quite slowly, given the ubiquitous temporary speed restrictions bedeviling Spanish railways. Ripoll is the first decent-sized town on the line, and from where a much more frequent service starts for Barcelona. A vast, dark, brooding, abandoned Romanesque building overshadows the platforms. This was the so-called New Station building, constructed in 1925, never used for its intended purpose as A, the line never gained its expected importance as an international route, and B, it was built on the wrong side of the line from the town. After 2 hours of winding slowly and picturesquely out the mountains, our train picks up a sense of purpose as it reaches the tobacco green plain of Vic, racing along under threatening skies and pre-storm sunshine. The young lady sitting across the aisle puts away her knitting, perhaps sensing this is a bit too rural a pastime for our rapidly urbanising train. We're even getting to skip some stations now, leaving serving them to suburban trains that haven't come all the way from France, as we slice down a narrow valley in the Catalan pre-coastal range of mountains. Though even here we're having to negotiate our way along a single track line, making an unscheduled pause at the dramatically sited town of Figaro in the Congost Gorge to let a northbound train race past. Maybe because I've been travelling practically non-stop for 5 days, but the ride into Barcelona came quite close to breaking me. The final few hours into the Catalan capital are a little dull, and for only the second time in my life I missed my stop because the stations in the tunnels under Barcelona's centre are poorly signed and terribly lit, and the train's information system wasn't working. On top of which, the missed connection at La Tour means I'm now facing another night on the coach, which is a bit meh. I haven't had a shower since Umeo, my phone was playing up, and Rail Europe was refusing to take my money to buy a reservation on a later train to Madrid so I could have time to beg a shower in Barcelona. But you know what? I came out of the horrid hole that is Plaza de Catalunya station, and suddenly the air was refreshingly cool, there were fountains playing, and just up the street is some uplifting architecture. There's not much some Gaudi can't solve. So I am going to head to the mainline station at Barcelona Sants, stick on my last clean shirt, settle into my backup first class seat for the 3 hours to Madrid with some beer and a PG Woodhouse book. Time to accept I'm on the home straight. No one's going to describe Barcelona Sants as a beautiful station, but it is bright and efficient today. Unless that is you're one of the poor souls queuing for the sole open ticket desk. But the theatre of security queue to get through to the train side was basically non-existent this evening, so nothing for me to complain about. Except, obviously, that once through, heaven forfend we'd be allowed down to the platform before the train arrives. Someone at Renfe clearly read about the people panicking at the first public film screening when it depicted a train arriving at a station and are taking no chances. We're finally let down to the Stygian depths once the train has arrived, stopped panting and been given a sugar lump, meaning we're inevitably slightly late leaving. But time to stop complaining. It's always a pleasure to be on one of Renfe's comfortable German-derived RVEs, and my mood is definitely lifted as we run out the Barcelona suburbs and alongside the green hills of Garraf. And also by the fact that the Barcelona Sants station buffet sells, amongst other things, little bottles of very garlicky gazpacho. We call at the rather out-the-way high-speed station of Camp de Tarragona. Judging by the surroundings, I'm guessing camp is a suggestion for what you might come here to do. We pass the town of Mont Blanc at 296 km/h as the sun sets over the mountains behind. Half ensconced in the comforting world of Woodhouse, I'm considering how much Bertie Wooster would have hated high-speed rail. It would enable whole hosts of ants to descend upon the metrop before a chap has had a chance to down a morning stiffener at the drones. Then we're into the vast, empty, dust-dry plains of the Spanish Central Plateau, a little cocoon of light and comfort in its often forbiddingly bleak landscape, which clearly demonstrates that the rain in Spain does not in fact stay on the plain. The Spanish plain, of course, lies in the rain shadow of mountain ranges on almost all sides, and it's therefore remarkably dry. It may seem a little odd that we're heading for Madrid, bang in the centre of Spain, when the destination of our longest journey must surely lie to the south. You can blame the highly radial nature of Spain's public transport for that. Even if I'd made that connection at La Tour this morning and got to Barcelona in time for the last direct train to Seville, it would have taken me there via a reversal in Madrid. Through Zaragoza, and with darkness now complete, into Madrid's vast high-speed Atocha station, fourth capital of the journey. There's just time to grab a martini at a little bar across the road from the Ministry of Agriculture, where at the table next to me, a friendship group is either breaking up over how to split the bill, or just creating a good story to laugh about at the end of the still young Iberian night. Then it's time to leap on what may be the final train of this adventure, for a very short cercanías hop round to the huge Estación Sur de Autobus, even at nearly midnight the beating heart of Spain's vast coach network. According to the vast departure board, my bus to Cadiz is in dock, hopefully for minor offences, though frankly the technological wizardry of the touchscreen help point doesn't help me much in locating where said dock is in this confusing complex. I still went down the wrong moving walkway. Contrary to the screen, the bus is not in fact in dock, but the smart coach does roll in with just enough time for the driver to explain his complex plans for how the luggage will be loaded for the numerous stops, and to still make a broadly timely midnight departure. Once everyone has got the hang of the concept of assigned seating, we're on the Autovia del Sur, off towards Cadiz, a place that I will forever associate from childhood and history book tales of Francis Drake singeing the King of Spain's beard there. I'm on this overnight bus as I absolutely have to be in Cadiz by midday, ideally a bit earlier. The first train in the morning from Madrid cuts it just too fine. So here we are, riding with Soquibus, a smallish company who nevertheless seem to have a monopoly on overnight routes to Andalusia. And you know what? It wasn't that terrible an experience. Soquibus's coaches are brand spanking new and very comfortable, as they should be, as their fares aren't exactly low. My fellow passengers, once accepting of their assigned seats, were pleasant and the driver solicitous. I got a surprising amount of sleep, though do feel I'd have got more if there were slightly fewer corners. Even the motorways seem to have a lot of corners. For some reason, despite a limited cheese intake yesterday, I had quite a substantive, if sporadic, dream that the bus had a letterbox in which you could post denunciations of other passengers. Any TV producers watching? Is there anything there? Any Freudian psychoanalysts watching? Keep your thoughts to yourselves. With just a few minutes' delay, we're soaring over the dockyards in the Bahia de Cadiz on the bridge of the Constitution of 1812. This constitution, promulgated here by the Cortes of Cadiz, was one of the world's first codified constitutions, establishing a constitutional monarchy, and served as a model for liberal constitutions as far afield as Norway and Mexico. We're dropped into Cadiz bus station for a much-needed café con leche at the rather pleasant cafe. In fact, weirdly, the whole bus station is rather pleasant, kept absolutely sparkling by three white-tunicked bleached blonde ladies wielding stepladders for the tricky bits. This guy's a bit of a menacing presence about the place, though, with his henchmen lurking behind him. The last time we saw the sea, it was the Great Horizon. This morning, it's the sparkling blue Atlantic behind Cadiz Cathedral. Cadiz is gorgeous. Other people clearly think so too, as there are 3 huge cruise ships moored up in port. Happily, it's still buffet breakfast o'clock, so their passengers have not yet penetrated the old town, leaving its alleyways quiet for me to wander in. Coming across the glowing cathedral facade from a narrow calle is quite something. I am wandering with some purpose though, stocking up for my lengthy sea voyage, which feels appropriate in this strategic maritime isthmus-based town. By my count, the English have attacked it 4 times. On one of those occasions, never to be the most successful, we did it jointly with the Dutch. I hear terrible tales of scurvy on the high seas, and I don't really know how much to trust my forthcoming vessel's catering, so I've purchased some solid supplies of pickles, and I'm having a second breakfast of tostadas con tomate and the most sublime orange juice I've ever had. Somehow, the entire lot in a touristy bit of the old town with table service cost just €3. The lady at the till seemed quite amused by my double take. It's good timing to be moving along. The groups with numbered flags have cleared out the buffets and disembarked from their ships into town. On that distant horizon is our first glimpse of home for the next 42.5 hours. It looks like a long walk, and I'm not sure the shade is going to hold out that long. Indeed, it doesn't. But finally, after about 1.5 kilometres of narrow, lorry-encroached pavements, is the first acknowledgement of the existence of this ferry for foot passengers, other than a grudging general wave of a hand in this general direction from a Guardia Civil officer at the port gate. We're a rare breed around here, the foot passenger. Indeed, there aren't enough of us for it to be worth having a bus to drive us onto the ferry, so instead a taxi is provided. Obviously, taxis are barred from this challenge, but this is an internal working for a public transport undertaking, I tell myself, so it's fine. After an awful lot of waiting around in and around the taxi, and a surprising amount of document checking for a domestic journey, we at last get to be taxied into the labyrinthine bowels of the Volcan de Tinamar, flagship of the long basically bankrupt Naviera Armas company, just announced as having been sold to arch-rival Balearia. In 30 minutes' time, the Volcan is due to cast off for the 800-mile distant Canary Islands, far closer to Africa than to Europe, in which archipelago lies the end point of the Schengen 200 adventure. Departure time comes and goes, and loading continues. The main business of the ferry seems to be transporting refrigerated containers and German or Dutch motorhomes to the Canaries. In the case of my fellow foot passengers, it's people with tiny dogs. Prices for a private cabin on this ferry are, remarkably, far higher than on the Norwegian coastal route, or to be more accurate, the subsidy is much more tightly targeted at island residents. So home for me is going to be the so-called Butaka VIP. It has reclining seats, some apples, and one basic but very welcome shower. Quite why a VIP wouldn't be in a cabin, I'm not sure, but actually the seats are very plush and come closer to lie flat than my nearest comparison, British Airways Transatlantic Business Class. And my fellow VIPs are a very quiet lot, happily. About an hour after scheduled departure time, we're starting to get some serious engine rumble, and the fish around the stern of the ship aren't happy about it. I am, however, as this is by no means my last connection, and I could do with a modicum of punctuality. Speed of boarding is not helped by the fact that for some of our destinations they need vehicles to be reversed aboard, and some drivers of motorhomes are not hugely good at this. 70 minutes late, El Volcan casts off, which is basically on time if you already changed your watch to Canary Island time. It's amusing that the only clock change on this entire journey is one within a country, which I take as a tacit admission that Madrid is actually in the wrong time zone. As we cast off, the pre-recorded English announcement includes the unimprovable phrase, "You are reminded that there is no eating or drinking allowed in the eating areas of the ship." It's too hot out on deck for a susceptible turtle, so we are supervising departure from the bar. Those looking at a map may be wondering why we're on a ferry to the Canaries. Surely the Azores, also firmly within the Schengen zone, are further from Varda. Well, yes, they are. But of the three Macaronesian archipelagos, Canaries, Azores and Madeira, only the Canary Islands have retained a scheduled ferry link to the European mainland. So our entire journey has been timed around this twice-a-week sailing from Cadiz to three Canarian ports. There are other ships for the Canaries from Huelva a bit further west along the coast, but the ferry port there has no public transport link at all, barring a 7-kilometre walk through an oil refinery from the nearest bus stop. So they were out. The 2011 built Volcan is very much a ship of two halves. The forward part, reception, VIP lounge, etc., doesn't seem to have been touched since it was launched. The rear half has been beautifully refurbished. I'm just looking at the empty swimming pool at the stern as we plough out into the deep blue Atlantic and thinking there will be no midnight dips as there were on the Castor, unless someone comes along with a hosepipe, when suddenly there's a gurgling and the pool starts filling itself. No hosepipe required, and very soon it's full of paddling toddlers and flirting teenagers. In all likelihood, this is the closest I'll ever come to making an Atlantic sea crossing. While a telepizza and a €1.80 draft lager by the pool with Woodhouse probably isn't the traditional image, it's really quite fun. The ocean continues to roll benignly. Sometimes the Volcan rolls a little with it, mostly her 30,000 tonnes just plough through. The colours of the Atlantic change infinitesimally, but they have a seriousness which lets you know this is no channel crossing. At sunset, we passed a northbound freighter, and earlier a warship on the distant horizon, but mainly it feels like we have the immense expanses to ourselves. By the morning, we've passed the longitudes of not hugely distant Casablanca and Marrakesh. Despite how long it took us to load, we're not a particularly busy ship. This is the last week of summer before the route frequency reduces. There's a quiet rhythm on board that everyone rapidly adopts. People doze, drink cheap beers or read. The joys of no phone reception and barely functioning Wi-Fi is that it's a long time since I've seen so many people with so few mobiles. A surprise has been how lovely the home baking is on board, indeed that it exists at all. I wasn't expecting such a monster wedge of delectably moist carrot and walnut cake for my €2.50 portion from the bar. I do hope this sort of personality and the almost consistently charming staff survives the sale of Naviera Armas.
So we're now well into our second day on board the Volcan de Tinamar. We're steaming along at about 20-22 knots southwestwards, paralleling the coast of Morocco, though we're out of sight of it. And late this afternoon we should be in amongst the Canary Islands, really pushing the limits of the Schengen zone.
Despite the bright weather, it took a surprisingly long time for the stark volcanic peaks of Lanzarote, most northerly of the Canary Islands, to emerge from the haze. In a very biblical touch, the first sign of us being near land were two grey doves circling the ship. Oh, and a data signal. I bet Noah was glad to see that too. A little over 28 hours since leaving Cadiz, and just over a week into the challenge, and the Volcan is swinging round in Arrecife harbour alongside a somewhat larger fellow guest. I suspect her swimming pool is bigger, but I bet the cake isn't as good and the tostada beer costs more. This is the first of the Volcan's calls at 3 of the 4 largest Canary islands. Between our mooring and the island's oil tanks sit the gently rusting remains of half of the Dundee-built freighter Telemon, grounded here in 1981 after springing a leak. There have long been plans to scrap her, but she's now sat there as long as I've been alive. Despite the busy efforts of a cast of at least 10s, both from the port and the ship, the loading and unloading of goods, people and their wheeled effects at Arrecife seems to take forever. We finally leave about 100 minutes late, and at some point I'll need to decide if that places my plans in enough jeopardy to change what I do at the next stop. Lanzarote has had some particularly turbulent periods of history. In particular, residents must have been confused when, after being captured by an Ottoman admiral in 1586, this was followed by English pirates landing in 1608 who destroyed the Spanish cathedral. Though that would have had nothing to the geological upheaval of the next century, when in 6 years after 1730, no fewer than 32 new volcanoes emerged on the island, which must surely beat their 5-year plan volcano targets. It really is an absolute beauty parade of volcanoes as we thrum along Lanzarote's eastern littoral in the evening light. As we turn into the Bocana Strait that separates Lanzarote from Fuerteventura, the large island that the Volcan doesn't serve, the Spanish flag flutters proudly over one of its much less populous outposts, the island of Lobos, known for its wolf seals, human population 4. As we tick into the final 24 hours of the challenge, the lights of Las Palmas on the full-stop shaped island of Gran Canaria begin to stain the dark horizon with gold. After Las Palmas, the Volcan is due to continue to Santa Cruz de Tenerife, taking me with her. But the 100-minute delay is giving me pause. There's no space left for slip-ups. If on time, the Volcan is due into Tenerife at 7 AM. I need to be on a bus from the other side of town at 10 AM. It ought to be fine, but what if there were more delays loading or unloading at Las Palmas? What if they are very slow getting foot passengers off at Santa Cruz as they were at Arrecife? As the Las Palmas pilot comes aboard, I make a rather counterintuitive decision out of an excess of caution. We're going to forego our second night in the now sweltering VIP lounge, leap off here in Gran Canaria, and first thing in the morning take a fast ferry across to Tenerife that is timetabled to arrive after the Volcan. I have more confidence in it to get us there when we need to be. At last there's a gap in the unloading traffic for us lowly foot passengers for Gran Canaria to disembark. Farewell then to the Volcan de Timor. It's been a pleasure, until for some reason you got really sticky and humid in the interior after Lanzarote. Because I'll be coming back to the port first thing in the morning to continue the actual journey, I decided it was fine to share a taxi into town with a lovely Lanzarote dwelling Irish couple and to pass a few early morning hours in Las Palmas, Spain's 5th largest urban area, and, unsurprisingly, dead at 3 AM. The only sounds on the promenade are the waves breaking over the volcanic reef that protects the beach, meaning it always sounds stormy, and the sand being zambonied by municipal tractors. I also get to watch, virtually, as the Volcan de Timor disproves all my doubts, unloads and loads with dispatch, and heads out towards Tenerife spot on time. Still, I'd have been on tenterhooks until 3 AM if I'd stayed on board, and there'd have been no way to disembark if the delay grew, I tell myself, so as not to feel too silly. The promised shuttle bus for the 6 AM fast ferry never shows up, so I have to grab a taxi back to the port in order to restart the journey from the gleaming new Armas passenger terminal. Not bad for a company on the brink of bankruptcy. Our vessel for the hour-and-a-half hop to Tenerife is also smart and new, a Tasmanian-built catamaran named Volcan de Teyde. Basically, Armas names all the vessels it owns, rather than leases, after made-up volcanoes, which seems odd when you operate in a part of the world full of real ones. There's just a small load of sleepy commuters as we slip away from the Las Palmas berth 7 minutes early, the business of breakfast rapidly underway in the cafe, past the sparkling oil rigs that are much prettier by night than by day. Ironically, just as the automatic announcement encourages us to enjoy the voyage, the catamaran begins to lurch wildly and most of the lights go out. It's good, I suppose, to be reminded that we're still on the Atlantic and that she is a little less forgiving of a relatively lightweight craft like this. I'm impressed I managed to get my breakfast to a table unspilled. The cafe lady makes clear that while she's happy to engage with the scalding steam and milk of the coffee machine in these sea conditions, the blades of the fresh orange juice machine would be a step too far. Possibly to distract us from the wallowing, the TV screen switched to showing a presentation of very unamazing facts. I learned, for example, that Banksy is an anonymous artist and that the Gutenberg press revolutionised printing. Amazing stuff. Things have calmed down a lot by the time we reach the shelter of the mountains that climb dramatically up from immediately behind Santa Cruz de Tenerife. The swell cut our cruising speed from 35 knots to 31, meaning we are slightly late despite the early departure. But that's still fast. The Volcan de Tinamar cruised at 22 knots, the Castor back in Norway just 14. We slide in, of course, next to the happily docked up for an hour now Timmermar, in whose crew, and particularly its punctiliously polite and well-mustachioed vehicle deck manager, I should have had more faith in. Still, we've been to 2 islands already today, and it's not yet 8 AM, and those won't be the last. Santa Cruz is an immediately likeable city, seat of the Parliament of the Canaries, which is confusing because I thought it was owls that had parliaments. I like how the city's architects decided that their skyline needs to compete with, but not score points off, the rugged mountain backdrop to the north. It did, however, take some expensive Swiss architects to come up with this slam-dunk idea for a reflecting pool in the Plaza de España. A second small breakfast is permitted when the first was consumed on a heaving catamaran, and I'm now on firm enough ground for the orange juice machine to be operated safely. That is not, I assure you, a donut. It's a dot. A donut's much smaller and therefore healthier cousin. I probably don't really need to take a tram down towards the bus station at the southern end of town, but as this journey has unaccountably avoided any trams so far, it feels like I should. This is, I think, the EU's most isolated tram system, the nearest being in Casablanca, nearly 1,000 kilometres away. Santa Cruz's trams have an intriguing ticketing system. Buy your ticket on your phone, activate it by scanning a QR code on the vehicle itself. On the edge of town is the very striking auditorium building. I probably barely need to tell you it's the work of Calatrava and is therefore a fantastic bit of form. Function, like being able to get to it from the tram stop without walking 3 sides of a block and crossing 3 major roads, perhaps a bit less so. Squatting beside the auditorium is the Castillo de San Juan Bautista, a clear product of the local black volcanic stone. Rather unsportingly, the Canarians gather here annually to reenact Nelson's failure to capture Santa Cruz in 1797. This channel has often made its opinions of various bus stations clear, so I'm delighted to announce that Santa Cruz's interchange is God tier. Indeed, it elevates the bus user almost to the level of a god. It's also here that I discovered that the Canarian Spanish word for a bus is, for etymological reasons no one knows, ejuajua. In Chilean and Peruvian Spanish, that means baby for far more understandable reasons. Even at the best bus stations, though, something gets relegated to the outside bays. Here it's the ferry buses. The companies that operate ferries from Los Cristianos in the far south of Tenerife provide free connecting buses from Santa Cruz, though there's only 3 of us taking advantage this morning. This is the second Autopista del Sur I've been on during this journey, but being on an island, its southward ambitions are a little curtailed. Less so its engineering ambitions as it clings to the sharp coastal slopes, older villages spilling down towards it, white villa resorts climbing up. It's a strange road, sometimes almost in a wilderness of rocks, scrubs and dry despair. At other times, it's the closest I've seen in what is vaguely Europe to a US-style strip mall. We passed the foot of the volcanic cone of La Montana de Cuarza, which dominates the south of the island, and then there's Los Cristianos, a perfectly normal-looking Spanish seaside resort, if it wasn't for the collapsed volcanic cone in the middle of it. Down to Los Cristianos harbour, where 2 competing catamarans stand ready to depart for our final island. I could have stuck with tried and tested Naviera Aramas, but because A, variety is the spice of life, and B, they leave slightly earlier, I've opted for the Bentago Express, run by Fred Olsen Express. Fred Olsen is better known as a cruise line, but that's a separate firm, albeit owned by the same family. Fred Olsen Express has been running inter-island ferries in the Canaries since the 1970s, and I like the circularity that the first and last ships on this journey are both owned by Norwegian family firms. The Bentago is a lot older than my Aramas catamaran from this morning, and the colour schemes reflect a somewhat millennial heritage, but she's swish and clean with powerful aircon and attendants dressed unaccountably as 1980s air stewardesses. We're away from Los Cristianos spot on time. When the Spanish government recognised the establishment of this town in 1888, it consisted of 29 houses and one cave. We're soon flying across the Gomera Channel at 33 knots. It's a lively ride, but nothing like this morning's smash and wallow on the way to Tenerife, though we soon hit heavier seas and the captain takes us closer into the lee of near-circular Gomera Island than normal for easier going. Gomera was Fred Olsen's first destination in 1974. Previously, it was supplied solely by the weekly banana boat. Before we reach the open ocean, I've headed to the cafe to obtain some sort of grilled vegetable wrap and, importantly, an excellent bit of apple cake. There seems to be a deep-set Spanish belief in good cake on ships. I reckon the Armada must have had at least 50 pastry chefs. As we speed across a smoother bit of sea, Mrs. Turtle is keeping an eye out for land. As a salty sea dog myself, I keep thinking we're sounding our foghorn. Turns out it's the hand dryer in the toilets behind me. Hiding in them there clouds, there's an island, and a tall one at that. Soon we are approaching a deeply inhospitable looking shoreline and slowing to tuck ourselves behind the solid looking breakwater which protects the island's port from the Atlantic swells. And so we set foot on El Hierro Island, most westerly outpost of the Canaries, almost 100% mountain, a place so at the end of the world that both Ptolemy and Cardinal Richelieu considered it to be the right place for the prime meridian. Everything should be measured eastwards from here, as this is where the west ends. The good news is that everything has fitted together and we should make the 200-hour deadline with ease. But we're not quite home and dry yet. Puerto de l'Estaca, where we have landed, is only a few kilometres from the island's capital at Valverde. But Valverde is the only Canarian capital not on the coast. Indeed, it's more than 600 metres above where we are now. Happily, there's a little Wawa, the number 11, run by local transport co-op Transiero, which pops down the hill at ferry time to carry us, yak-like, up the hairpinning road. Port and catamaran get smaller as we climb the dry hillside, but by the time we're on the fringes of Valverde, we're into the cloud bank. We squeeze our way through this highland whitewashed town past the island council. Local politics are not without drama. In 2023, the council voted to remove its leader, Javier Armas González of the Gerena Independent Group, and replace him with Alpidio Armas of the Spanish Socialist Party. Nothing too odd about that, except those two men are brothers. We reach the bus station, hub of the island's surprisingly comprehensive and regular network, but we have a short wait before we continue onwards, so time to stroll around this atmospheric little town of 5,000 people. Despite the diminutive size, it has 3 banks, 2 supermarkets, at least 4 bars, a trade union training centre and a travel agent. I'm tempted to ask if they can book me a trip to Norway. What everyone thinks is our bus, en route 2 along the eastern backbone of the island, is waiting at the bus station with a solid group of potential passengers, school age and beyond, including one person hot desking amid the succulents. The grind doesn't stop. Much confusion ensues as the driver takes the bus away and wanders off. The lady from the recycling depot, who understandably wants to get home, goes off to remonstrate. It seems to have some effect as the same bus is brought back, but with a different driver. The €1.35 flat fare on the island is doing wonders for clearing out my store of almost worthless copper coins. It's remarkable to be on a bus service that starts off above the hilltop wind turbines and keeps on climbing. Soon we're over 1,000 metres up amid the lava fields, and boy do my ears feel the altitude. It seems an odd place to suddenly encounter a roundabout on these almost empty roads, but then I'm no traffic engineer. From here we descend the southern face of the island, and the landscape changes completely as we curve through sun-dappled pine forests, the ground a cushion of soft discarded needles. At El Hierro's pretty second city of El Pinar, the timetable says we need to change for the connecting bus number 8. It turns out the number 2 just turns seamlessly into the number 8. However, because the fares are route-based, the through passengers all dutifully traipse up to the driver to hand over another €1.35. Ian's finding something else to complain about. We're corkscrewing back towards the sea at 500 metres and dropping, heading for the southern tip of this tricorn-shaped island. I believe large parts of the moon landings were in fact filmed here. If you know where to look in the footage behind Neil Armstrong, you can see the Francoist secret police pretending to be craters. And there, below us, is the first glimpse of another hard-scrabble fishing town at the end of the world. 5,650 kilometres from its sort of twin at the other end of the Schengen zone. And so, after 192 hours and 27 minutes, we come to La Laja bus stop in the village of La Restinga, the end of the longest public transport journey you can make entirely in the zone. We've made it, and with plenty of time to spare. Until 1960, when some people from Gomera settled here, La Restinga barely existed. Fishing and now recreational diving are the only reasons for this unlikely settlement on the Atlantic shore amid the lava fields. It's unquestionably remote. Head due south from here, the next landfall will be Antarctica. At the end of La Restinga's long breakwater is a sculpture marking Europe's most southerly point. That's a very questionable claim, as this isn't geographical Europe really, and political Europe extends to French Guiana. But you can't reach the sculpture anymore anyway, as the end of the pier is used by the Coast Guard to process small boat rescues, migrants plucked from fragile boats as they seek to cross the Atlantic from West Africa to the Canaries. Right now on the pier, Spanish officials are firmly, if courteously, questioning 6 men in life jackets, while across Restinga's Cove echo the jolly beats of the over-60s aqua aerobics class in the Black Sand Bay. Open borders are great, until you're on the wrong side of them.
Hola from La Restinga on El Hierro Island and the Canary Islands. I am exhausted and exhilarated to be here on this black lava beach at the end of an incredible journey from Vardø in high Arctic Norway. 5,600 kilometres simply as the crow flies, nothing to count the route we actually took. It takes us 193 hours very nearly. 13 trains, 2 coaches, 8 buses, something like that. I'll put the proper numbers up on the screen shortly. It's been an incredible journey, and I hope that you've enjoyed coming along with me just as much as I've enjoyed doing it. And I've had a huge amount of fun since that time 4 years ago when we discovered that what the post-pandemic world wanted for a national news story was something about a bloke who got on 13 buses and went to Morecambe, which was a surprise, as much of a surprise to me as it was to everyone else. So it's been a journey. What you haven't seen is that there's been a journey for my family as well at the same time. We've gone through a lot of challenges and a lot of heartbreak at times, frankly. But I'm delighted to say that if all goes well, in December we will be adding a new member to our family, which we are extraordinarily excited about. Mrs. Tuss doesn't know yet that she's going to be doing some help with the babysitting, which is great. But what it does mean, obviously, is that I'm not going to be able to gallivant out across Europe or on night buses across London for the foreseeable future, which does mean, sadly, there is going to be a hiatus for this channel, albeit for the best possible reason. It's not the end. Mrs. Turtle wouldn't let this be the end. We've got to keep her in cabbage leaves. But it will be a while. It will be back. It may be in a slightly different format, maybe a shorter format. Who knows? So for now, I just want to say once again, thank you so much for supporting this channel, for all the joy and all the feedback. I will be back at some point. It won't be imminent and it won't be immediate, but I look forward to seeing you again. And in the meantime, happy travelling, and thank you so much from me and from Mrs. Turtle.